Howdy everyone! With the Return to Zendikar coming up on the horizon, I wanted to follow up my Eldrazi Commander video with my other Zendikar-themed EDH deck, Omnath Locus of Rage. The new Omnath Locus of Creation coming out in Zendikar Rising has some amazing elemental elegance, but personally my choice will always be Sir Omnathington II Esquire. See, I started playing right around the time Oath of the Gatewatch came out, and the first deck I ever got was the Battle for Zendikar Landfall starter deck. And from that point on, I continued to think about Zendikar and its floating landscapes often. So before I go crazy with all the new landfall cards coming out, let's get into what this deck is right before Zendikar Rising. Our commander is a 7-mana 5/5 body with a killer landfall and elemental death trigger, so you can probably already tell where this build is going. We want to slam as many lands onto the field as possible and get a ton of triggers for doing it. So, let's start off with my Timmy top 3 for this deck. As a reminder, the Timmy top 3 always include my favorite creatures to see hit the battlefield, excluding my commander. First, Radha, Heart of Keld is a 3/3 legendary elf warrior with first strike on our turn at least, and she lets us look at the top card of our library at any time and play that card if it's a land, which is the important part. Finally, if we're in a pinch, we can pay 4 red-green, and Radha gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of lands we control. I've played with each of Radha's cards throughout the years, and while this one isn't my favorite, it fits perfectly here. Crash of Rhino Beetles is our second card in the top 3, with a 5/5 body, trample, and a +10/+10 buff if we have 10 or more lands. I can't really express why I love this card in any other way than just pointing at the flavor text. When the herd moves, so should you. Good advice, Eon. That theme isn't any different with Rampaging Brontodon. Not even the tallest tree stands a chance against the underside of a dinosaur's foot. There aren't any quotations here, so I just choose to believe this is a fact on Ixalan. Moving right along to the core strategy of this deck, let's talk about my favorite mechanic in all of Magic, Landfall. And we can't talk about Landfall without talking about the face card of my very first starter deck, Orin Rife Hydra. Not only does he get a counter whenever we play a land, but if that land happened to be a forest, he gets 2 counters instead. This card was quite literally my first big creature and went on to win me several games of 60-card Magic when I was just starting out with my friends, so for that he stands apart from the Timmy top 3 in a little special place of honor. Rampaging Baloths, Avenger of Zendikar, and Zendikar's Royal are next, all 3 helping get us serious board presence. Avenger of Zendikar gets us plant tokens on ETB, we can make big with landfall. Rampaging Baloths is a little more fun with each land we play spawning 4/4 green beasties, and Zendikar's Royal gets us 2/2 elementals instead. Plated Geopede, Grove Rumbler, and Baloth Woodcrasher all get buffed until end of turn for each land we play. If we want something a little more permanent than that, we have Undergrowth Champion. I like this card a lot because it has staying power, blocking damage, and sticking around to get bigger and bigger and bigger when we play more lands. If you're in for some free poke damage, we have Tunneling Geopede and Kosi's Ravager, each dealing 1 damage per land we play, the Ravager to a target player while the Geopede hits every opponent. Everyone hates the Geopede. On the more passive-aggressive side, we have cards like Colony Heart Expedition that gets a quest counter per landfall trigger, and at 3 counters, we can sacrifice it for 2 basic lands right onto the battlefield. Lotus Cobra is a danger noodle with a little more of a direct ability, giving us 1 mana of any color per landfall. Our last 3 battle-ready landfall creatures are Turntimber Basilisk, Geyser Glider, and Belligerent Whiptail. These 3 can only really make use of 1 landfall trigger per turn, but back to that big beautiful Basilisk for a bit, because this little guy can kamikaze even the biggest blocker as soon as a land hits the battlefield. Rounding out our landfall segment, we have 2 enchantments and a tree. Tree, actually, and my favorite one at that. Jati Offshoot is a 1-mana plant that gains us 1 life for each landfall. Nice and simple. We also have both Retreat to Kazandu and Retreat to Valakut, both passively gaining us effects of our choice on landfall. Kazandu lets us put counters on creatures or gain 2 life per, and Valakut gives us the choice of a buff for a creature or disabling an opponent's most dangerous blocker. Now, what fun is Landfall without playing as many lands as possible per turn? So, to help with that, we have a host of cards, starting with Exploration, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, and Mina and Den Wildborn. Exploration sets the theme here, which is obviously allowing us to play additional lands each turn. And in addition to that, our Dryad makes our lands chromatic, and Mina and Den Wildborn allow us to pop a land back to our hand to give a creature trample. Our second batch of extra land goodies are Wayward Swordtooth, Oracle of Moldiah, and Azusa Lost But Seeking. Swordtooth is a great extra land per turn card, but the last 2 are our focus right here. Our Oracle lets us not only play an additional land, but we can also play lands from the revealed top card of our library. Azusa is twice the fun, with 2 additional land plays instead of just 1, so be sure to take advantage of that for the 1 turn she'll be around. Lastly, Courser of Crufix is like a sugar-free oracle, revealing our top card and allowing us to play it if it's a land, but without all that sugary extra land goodness. Now, like most of you watching, I hate it when my lands go bye-bye, and with all this ramp, we run the risk of most of our lands ending up blown to bits, so to use that to our advantage, we have Ranmanap Excavator and Splendid Reclamation, both allowing us to get multiple lands back from our graveyard. Next, Titiana, Protector of Argoth, also gets us a land back from the grave on ETB and creates tokens when our lands enter the grave. Last but not least is Pulse of Marasa, which lets us snag either a creature or land in the graveyard and gains us 6 life as a little bonus. Get your Nessa counter ready, because next we have Nessa Vastwood Seer. She gets us a forest from our library on ETB, and when a land enters the battlefield under our control, if we have 7 or more, we transform her into Nissa Sage Animist. Her +1 lets us reveal the top card of our library, putting it into play if it's a land card, and into our hand if it isn't. -2 gets us a 4/4 legendary elemental named Ashaya, the Awoken World, who, if you've been keeping up on Zendikar Rising spoilers, is now Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. Finally, her -7 untaps 6 target lands and turns them all into 6/6 elementals. Following that, we have some more Nissa fun with Natural Connection, which, like a lot of the cards I'm about to talk about, gets us a basic land from our library. For some non-Nissa action, Ovenwald Hydra gets us a land, which helps twofold since its power and toughness are both equal to our number of lands, and I usually like equipping my Hydra with something like Sword of the Animist to give it +1/+1 and add another land on attack. But of course, fetching 1 land isn't enough, so to get us more, we have Nissa's Pilgrimage and Cultivate. Both of these cards let us search for more lands to add to our Dragon's Hoard of Mana. Nissa's Expedition and Hour of Promise are 2 more cards that essentially do the same thing, helping us snag lands from our library, and if we're lucky or do some savvy modification, make use of their secondary effects as well. Next, Nissa's Renewal is a high-cost way to get 3 landfall triggers and gain 7 life to boot. Collective Voyage and Traverse the Outlands both get us several landfall triggers depending on the X variable. And last but most certainly not least is my absolute favorite Planeswalker card, Nissa Worldwaker. Her first +1 turns our lands into 4/4 elementals, her second +1 untaps up to 4 forests, and her ult lets us search our library for any number of forests and put them onto the battlefield. Then those forests all become 4/4 creatures. I think this is the most Nissa flavor I have in any deck, but I think it's over now. We aren't done with ways to seek out lands just yet, though, with Warped Landscape, Jund Panorama, and Naya Panorama, all letting us sacrifice them to search our library for a basic mountain or forest. Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse are 2 similar cards that tap to sacrifice for a land, and we also have Myriad Landscape and Blighted Woodland, 2 more very similar cards. Myriad Landscape costs 2 to search for 2 basic lands that share a type, and for just a little more, Blighted Woodland fetches any 2. Last and most important of our trigger-happy lands is Ghost Town. Let me tell you about this land, folks. This here land taps for good old pure colorless mana, and for a whopping, I say a whopping 0, we can return this beaut to our hand, so on our turn we can play it again, and again, and again, and again, and again. But in all seriousness, Ghost Town is a good time, and at time of writing it's only about $1.50, so get you one. Those landfall and other creatures we talked about earlier only make up about half of our total fighting force, though, at least until the new landfall creatures come out. I'm looking at you, Phylath. Anyway, our Elementals start with Living Twister, another creature that can help us get landfall triggers by bouncing tapped lands to our hand. 3 times is the charm with Soulbright Flamekin, our next card, giving trample and a refund of red mana. It's one very aggressive way to filter. Smokebraider is a mana dork that only helps our elemental spells, while Leafkin Avenger is another mana dork that gives us 1 green for each creature we control with power 4 or greater. And, spoiler alert, we're gonna have a lot. Zendikar Incarnate and Rebel Hulk are 2 more creatures that get bigger the more lands we have, and Rebel Hulk's Blood Rush ability is a nice instant speed surprise. Last of the elementals are 2 seriously tough to deal with creatures. The king and queen of fungus and flora, Phytotitan, returns to our control tap at the beginning of the next upkeep if he dies, while Gaia's Revenge doesn't intend to die at all, with an 8/5 hasted body that can't be countered and hexproof from every color except green. Visiting the Higher Realms for a glimpse of glory, we have our gods of this deck: Nylea, god of the hunt, Purphoros, god of the forge, and god Eternal Ronus. Nylea acts as a convenient, indestructible way to give our creatures trample. Purphoros deals 2 damage to opponents whenever a creature enters under our control, and finally, God Eternal Snake Daddy is a 5/5 with Death Touch that doubles the power and grants vigilance to each other creature we control when he enters. Our last creatures are our final supporting members with Skarg Guildmage, another way to give creatures trample or bring lands to life, and Budoka Gardener can tap to let us put a land into play, and then if we have 10 or more lands, we flip him into Dokai Weaver of Life, who can spawn some seriously big XX elementals. Finally, coming up to the end, let's round things off with our last few spells and non-basic lands. First, Warstorm Surge and Where Ancients Tread are both destructive ways to make bodies hitting the battlefield more beneficial. Awakening Zone creates Eldrazi Spawn that we can squish for mana if we don't have enough already. And our last spell is one of my favorites and a near and dear to my heart, Decimate. This spell destroys 4 targets for 4 mana. 1 artifact, 1 enchantment, 1 creature, and 1 land. The only catch is that if a legal target exists, it must be targeted. So make sure all the things you want to blow up are on the other side of the field. Our last non-basic lands start with Temple of the False God, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, and Command Beacon, for you-know-what. As with all my green decks, I personally run my Gaia's Cradle, but Growing Rites of Itlimoc/Itlimoc Cradle of the Sun is definitely more reasonable and arguably more effective. And our final 3 lands are Temple of Abandon, Timbergorge, and Cinderglade, simply to tap for either of our colors. And with that, I've gone over all the cards in this deck besides basic lands. I'll include an MTG Goldfish link in the description for a closer look at the deck list and in case I missed anything. And please leave your feedback in the comments and like, share, and subscribe if you want to see some more lighthearted Magic the Gathering fun in the future.